ROUCOLLE the Miser, George Orwell. Eric Arthur Blair, better known as George Orwell, is an English novelist, essayist, journalist, and a short story writer. He was born in Bengal, where his father was a British colonial civil servant. After his education in London, he worked as a civil servant in India. Rucole the Miser is the 23rd chapter of George Orwell's novel Down and Out in Paris and London, which narrates his bitter and sweet experiences in Paris and London. Set in two cities, the novel describes the people whom he met in these places. The story tells the life of the miser who falls prey to a Jew who makes him enter the smuggling business. On discovering the fact that he is cheated, Rucole dies heartbroken. Although it was criticized for its anti Semitic undertones, the story has been lauded for its subtle explorations into complexities of the human mind. Rokole the Miser. As soon as I left the Auberge de Jihan Cotard, I went to bed and slept the clock round, all but 1 hour. Then I washed my teeth for the first time in a fortnight, bathed, and had my hair cut, and got my clothes out of the pawn. I had 2 glorious days of laughing. I even went in with my best suit to the auberge, leaned against the bar, and spent 5 francs on a bottle of English beer. It is a curious sensation being a customer where you have been a slave's slave. Boris was sorry that I had left the restaurant just at the moment when we were lances and there was a chance of making money. I have heard from him since, and he tells me that he is making 100 francs a day and has set up a girl who is a treasuries and never smells of garlic. I spent a day wandering about our quarter, saying goodbye to everyone. It was on this day that Charlie told me about the death of old Rocole the miser who had once lived in the quarter. Very likely, Charlie was lying as usual, but it was a good story. Rocole died aged 74 a year or two before I went to Paris. But the people in the quarter still talked of him while I was there. He never equaled Daniel Dancer or anyone of that kind, but he was an interesting character. He went to the less halls every morning to pick up damaged vegetable and ate cat's meat and wore a newspaper instead of underclothes and used the wainscoting of his room for firewood and made himself a pair of trousers out of a sack. All this with 500,000 francs invested. I should like very much to have known him. Like many misers, Rocole came to a bad end through putting his money into a wildcat scheme. One day, a Jew appeared in the quarter, an alert, business-like young chap who had a first-rate plan for smuggling cocaine into England. It is easy enough, of course, to buy cocaine in Paris, and this smuggling would be quite simple in itself. Only there is always some spy who betrays the plan to the customs or the police. It is said that this is often done by the very people who sell the cocaine because the smuggling trade is in the hands of a large combine who do not want competition. The Jew, however, swore that there was no danger. He knew a way of getting cocaine direct from Vienna, not through the usual channels, and there would be no blackmail to pay. He had got into touch with Rocole through a young Pole, a student at the Sorbonne, who was going to put 4,000 francs into the scheme if Rocole would put 6,000. For this, they could buy 10 pounds of cocaine, which would be worth a small fortune in England. The Pole and the Jew had a tremendous struggle to get the money from between old Rucole's claws. 6,000 francs was not much. He had more than that sewn into the mattress in his room. But it was agony for him to part with the soul. The Pole and the Jew were at him for weeks on end, explaining, bullying, coaxing, arguing, going down on their knees and imploring him to produce the money. The old man was half frantic between greed and fear. His bowels yearned at the thought of getting perhaps 50,000 francs profit, and yet he could not bring himself to risk the money. He used to sit in a corner with his head in his hands, groaning and sometimes yelling out in agony, and often he would kneel down and pray for strength, but still he couldn't do it. But at last, more from exhaustion than anything else, he gave in quite suddenly. He slit open the mattress where his money was concealed and handed over 6,000 francs to the Jew. The Jew delivered the cocaine the same day and promptly vanished. And meanwhile, as was not surprising after the first Rucole has made, the affair had been noised all over the quarter. The very next morning, the hotel was raided and searched by the police. Rucole and the Paul were in agonies. The police were downstairs, working their way up, searching every room in turn, and there was a great packet of cocaine on the table, with no place to hide it and no chance of escaping down the stairs. The Pole was for throwing the stuff out of the window, but Rucole would not hear of it. Charlie told me that he had been present at the scene. He said that when they tried to take the packet from Rucole, he clasped it to his breast and struggled like a madman, although he was 74 years old. He was wild with fright, but he would go to prison rather than throwing his money away. At last, when the police were searching only one floor below, somebody had an idea. A man on Rucole's floor had a dozen tins of face powder which he was selling on commission. It was suggested that the cocaine could be put into tins and passed off as a face powder. The powder was hastily thrown out of the window and the cocaine substituted, and the tins were put openly on Rucole's table as though there were nothing to conceal. A few minutes later, the police came to search Rucole's room. They tapped the walls to look up the chimney and room. They examined the floorboards and then, just as they were about to give up, having found nothing, the inspector noticed the tins on the table. Tins, he said. Have a look at those tins. I hadn't noticed them. What's in them, eh? Face powder, said the Pole as calmly as he could manage. But at the same time, instant, Rucole let out a loud groaning noise from alarm, and the police became suspicious immediately. They opened one of the tins and tipped out the contents, and after smelling it, the inspector said that he believed it was cocaine. Rucole and Paul began swearing on the names of the saints that it was only face powder, but it was no use. The more they protested, the more suspicious the police became. The two men were arrested and led off to the police station, followed by half the quarter. At the station, Rucole and the Pole were interrogated by the commissaire, while a tin of the cocaine was sent away to be analyzed. Charlie said that the scene Rucole made was beyond description. He wept, prayed, made contradictory statements, and denounced the Pole all at once, so loud that he could be heard half a street away. The policemen almost burst with laughing at him. After an hour, a policeman came back with a tin of cocaine and a note from the analyst. He was laughing. This is not cocaine, monsieur, he said. What? Not cocaine? Said the commissaire. Macelers, what is it then? It is face powder. Rucole and the Pole were released at once, entirely exonerated but very angry. The Jew had double crossed them. Afterwards, when the excitement was over, it turned out that he had played the same trick on other two people in the quarter. The Pole was glad enough to escape, even though he had lost his 4,000 francs, but poor old Rucole was utterly broken down. He took to his bed at once, and all that day and half the night they could hear him thrashing about, mumbling and sometimes yelling out at the top of his voice, 6,000 francs, nom de Jesus Christ, 6,000 francs. 3 days later, he had some kind of stroke, and in a fortnight he was dead. Of broken heart, Charlie said.